keep finding ways that we're helping partners finding either, balance in their life or focus or purpose.
Practices that are going to help improve your project management skills or your finances.
We're here to talk about setting long-term goals and then how to achieve them.
Increasing your quality, therefore becoming the best place in town to work. Welcome to Academy Live. Welcome back to another episode of Academy Live. Chris and Bessie are off today. So, what do you do when you hit a revenue plateau? Business leaders face many challenges throughout their entrepreneurial journeys. In this show, I will share what me and my team of coaches have learned over the last 13 years and how to push through the most common revenue plateaus. Together, we will discover what a good business manager looks like and how to build the right team with the right strategy. We'll review key leadership lessons and how operations change as you move through the operational maturity levels. But now, let's take a look at what's on Rex's shelf.
What's that stuff behind his head? Frame photos and books he's read. Each one's got a story to tell, so let's educate ourselves on Rex's shelf.
I think I'm going to have to thank Studios for the work on that intro. Like, that is just fire. Anyway, I've said this many times, and I will say it today and again in the future, that there are really 5 major kind of turning points in my career. One of them was joining the peer group, and that's why I'm so passionate about the PAX 8 Academy peer groups, how much of an impact it made on me having a bar and others to be accountable to, and just the best practice sharing that goes on and learning all the financial acumen. Another one was the EMyth, and we'll be talking about that in a second. The third one was getting ITIL Foundation certified. If you're not familiar with IT service management or the IT infrastructure library, and how it's in an international standard for how an IT department will run IT operations. The solutions selling course, I took one called First, which was foundations, issues, results, solutions, and teaming. But this is kind of what went into building the entire result selling framework. It is learning to do solution-based selling. And then as I got further in my career and we had the larger organizations, the EOS, the traction methodology, those are all things that really kind of were transition points in my career. But right here on my shelf, between the 2 people holding up the knowledge, right? Because all that knowledge is between the 2 people, is the EMyth. So the EMyth, this book has been around a long time, I think since the early 80s, written by Michael Gerber, the EMyth Revisited. In this book, it talks a lot about how we have to see ourselves as the technician, the manager, and the entrepreneur. And we have different roles. And most of us, especially in this tech industry, started off as technicians that had an entrepreneurial seizure and started a business, right? And for those of us that are owners or in senior leadership, there's a couple of jokes that always ring true for me. One is, when you own a business, you only have to work half days. You even get to pick which 12 hours. Or when you own a business, you sleep like a baby, up half the night crying, right? I think a lot of us can relate to those two. And what this is about is, when the going gets tough, we go back to what is most natural to us, which is being that technician. But it's so important to break away. And the term working in the business versus working on the business, that came from the EMyth. But we have to tear ourselves away from the tyranny of the urgent and do the most important stuff, which is working on the business. And that's what this book is a guide to how to work on the business. So if you haven't read the EMyth, I would definitely encourage you to get it on your to-do list. So awesome. All right. I'm going to jump into our topic today, the entrepreneurial journey. I would like to let you know I am monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, go ahead, drop them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them, as we go through. So the operational journey, if you want, I put my email on the screen, which I think is risky, but if you have any questions, after the show's over or you're watching it later, don't hesitate to email me. Just, mention you were watching Academy Live, and I would be happy to get back with you. So, okay, so here's what we're going to go through today. We're going to talk about these growth plateaus that I commonly see companies kind of get stuck. We're going to talk about some leadership lessons. We're going to get into the actual operational journey itself, and then we'll end on the 5 phases, something near and dear to my heart. So let's talk about these 4 maturity levels. First, we have the establishment level, right? That's when you're getting the business started. The owner kind of carries all of the decision making, and they're running the business largely by their gut feelings, what's going on in the business. Remember, they're right there in every interaction that's going on with your clients, right? So typically everybody's going to report to the owner. There won't really be, it'll be a very flat organizational structure. We commonly see these 2 management extremes where the owner is either a total micromanager, he's afraid nothing's going to be done to their standards, and they just sort of make sure that everything is happening exactly the way they want it. It's a very frustrating environment to work in. Typically, like I said, they're technicians that had an entrepreneurial seizure that started the business, and they haven't gotten used to having a team yet. The other one is sort of the dump and run, right? This is the total abdication, saying, I don't know, I don't have time to teach you, you figure it out, go figure it out. And then typically they're frustrated when it doesn't happen to the standard that they were hoping for. From a KPI perspective, there really aren't any KPIs in this company. Again, we don't need them because the owner's gut instinct is very accurate because they're right there involved in all the day-to-day interactions. There typically see a lot of control issues where we have to convince folks to let go, let your team do it. They'll figure it out. They might stumble along the way, but they'll figure it out. And like if we were to ask about what's the overall valuation of this business, that valuation is going to be very much tied to the owner and whether the owner is staying or not, if they needed to sell the organization. So we grow to about 8 employees, everybody reporting to the owner. The rule of 7 is going to come into play here. No manager really should have more than 7 direct reports. You can push it to 10 or 11, but at that point, you're really not doing a great job leading your team of direct reports. But we move into the second stage, which we like to call enablement. And really the owners are learning to share that responsibility with others on their team. The structure tends to look like an owner and a service manager running the company. And this will get us up to about 15-ish employees, right? The rule of 7 times 2. We got 2 leaders now, an owner and a service manager. What's happening in this stage is the owner's getting a little bit disconnected from the day-to-day interactions, but their gut is still very accurate. They're seeing a lot of people on the internet, Gary Pica talking about all-in seat price, service leadership, talking about gross margin by business unit, and you're going to hear technicians per endpoint, right? There's all these statistics that are out there, and you start thinking, I want to run some of those for myself, right? And you go into your systems and you start running reports, and you realize that the reports don't make any sense. And then you come to the conclusion they don't make any sense because we don't have standardized processes and procedures that create the data that make the reports make sense. So this is the time when we go to work on process and procedure. We're doing a lot of work on that life of the ticket, how we triage tickets, how we dispatch tickets, how we enter time against tickets. And utilization is the main thing we're trying to drive there, right? Getting our engineers billing at least 6.5 hours out of their 8-hour day or better, hopefully. We also start to work on efficiency, where we got all these tools. We got RMM tools, we got security tools, we got all, a documentation system. We got all these tools, but we're barely using them, right? So we go to work also on trying to use these tools. When I ask companies of this size, kind of that 8 to 15, 16 employee range, tell me about how you have regular staff meetings. They almost always say, well, we try to schedule them, but there's always too many people out, so they get canceled more often than we actually have the meetings. And then there's just an overall general lack of leadership happening at this second stage, where the owner was the tech that started a business. They barely know how to have a leader, let alone train their best tech, right? Typically what I see happens is they take their best tech because they're the best with the technology and they're the best with people, and they promote them into the service manager role. Kind of a fun story. A couple of months ago, I was at the place I started my career and worked for 19 years was Alvaca Networks down in Huntington Beach, and Oli is the owner. And he was giving a little talk. They had their 40th anniversary party, so I flew down. He had all his employees together. He was giving a little talk about the history of the company, and I caught his eye. And he goes, "Oh yeah." And then I made the classic mistake of promoting my best tech to service manager. And at first I was like, "Oh, he's talking about me." And then I was like, "Wait, what?" Right? But he's right. Like, we stumbled together, me growing from a tech in the early 90s into a leader, service manager, like all the way through the 90s, because he really didn't know how to teach me how to do that job very well, which is why he put me in a peer group and sent me to courses and management trainings and stuff. But the reality is none of that's happened yet when we're at this stage. But we know, because we're working on process and procedure, we're at the end of this second enablement stage, because we look up at our dashboards with all these KPIs and they match what our gut says, right? That means we've been successful at creating good data. And the reason that's important is because as we move into this third expansion stage, now the company has a more developed leadership team. There's somebody representing finance, maybe admin. There's usually somebody on the leadership team representing sales. Service may have 2 or 3 managers or leaders, and then we got the owner, right? So this leadership team is developing. Now the owner is like 2 or 3 stages removed from all the day-to-day interaction with clients, and their gut instinct becomes completely inaccurate. And that's why the standardized process procedures that create the good data, and that way we can run the business and make decisions based on our scorecards and our dashboards. And the other thing that happens kind of at this stage is culture becomes a problem. We really have to standardize where all of the leaders are playing from the same sheet of music, which is our mission, our vision, and our core values. Otherwise, because if you don't standardize that, you'll end up with this group of individuals taking on the core values of this leader, and this group of individuals taking on the core values of that leader. And at this stage, we just see a lot of confusion on why the company exists. The other thing that happens is you start to have this accountability problem happening within the leadership team, where nobody's really sure who's doing what, right? And that's where EOS really becomes a thing, where we're having our meetings. We've decided what's most important. Everybody's working on the most important things. We're having our level 10 meetings. Is this done or not done? Is this on track or off track? And that creates that accountability that keeps the company moving kind of all in the right direction. One phenomenon happens here, though, with the owner, is they start to feel a little bit lost, right? Their team is running the business, and they're starting to wonder, well, what's my role here? And hopefully we get to this fourth stage, right? Which is, we call it enhancement, but it's typically these multi-geography. The company's growing, the company's expanding. We're taking on new lines of business. These are the things that happen. And the reality is at this stage, the business is run pretty well without the owner. I saw this in one of Arlen Sorensen's morning newsletters the other day. He was talking about the necessity for transition planning and exit planning, and he talks about the fact we are all eventually going to exit, right? The death rate, and I love the way he put this. The death rate hovers right around 100%. So we need to be ready to, have some transition. But really, what the owner finds is that the highest and best use of their time now is sharing the wisdom that they've developed through the years of running the business. Um, so here's what I'm going to do for the rest of this. I want to talk about some leadership lessons. We'll hit on the EMyth again real quick. Management versus leadership, because there is a difference. Grooming your successor, or developing your successor. I probably need to change that. There's a quality curve that I'd like to explain what that is. Talk about the 4 different learning models, and some one hand up, one hand down. So I talked about the EMyth a couple of minutes ago. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but the reality is when the going gets tough, we go right back to being a technician, and we have to realize we have to pull ourselves away from that tyranny of the urgent. And the highest and best use of our time isn't working a ticket, it's working on the business, and teaching our leaders that the highest and best use of their time is also working on the business. So I'm going to take a minute and talk a little bit about this concept of creating new managers versus creating new leaders, right? We got the good leader in the left column over there, right? And then we've got the characteristics of the bad boss in the right column. Trust but verify versus micromanaging, right? Here's an example. Let's say I have an engineer assigned to checking every client's backup every day, right? I can micromanage and go in and say, hey, did you check the backup every day? Hey, did you check the backup? Hey, did you check the backup? And just constantly be over their shoulder. That's a very frustrating environment to work on. A good leader is going to spot check that himself or herself on a regular basis, just to make sure it's happening as they expect, but never say anything to that employee. And they probably won't even know that they were checked unless there's an issue. But they're not having that daily feeling of being micromanaged. Take for granted versus show appreciation, right? The good leaders just going to on a regular basis say, I really appreciate that, or recognize an individual for some good work that they did. Cup is half full versus half empty. You all know the person that the cup is half empty and how frustrating they are to be around. Learn from hindsight versus blame from hindsight. I've literally heard owners or managers say to their team, that was so stupid. I could have seen that coming a mile away. How did you let that happen? Right? Where the great leaders that I've been around for most of my career, it sounds very different. It sounds like, okay, it sucks that happened, but what are we going to do different going forward to make sure that doesn't happen again? Totally different way of handling the same situation, right? The good leaders set goals. They have goals aligned with strategic vision and mission, where it's the number one thing the staff is craving is direction. But it's so easy to get caught up in the tyranny of the urgent that we just never find time to work on that. The respond versus react. I'd like to hit on this one. Ultimately, we're all going to get a call from a client telling us about some terrible thing that somebody on our team did. And the react person, their answer is going to sound like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. That's terrible. I'm going to call them in and yell at them right now, right? But the respond manager, they say it very differently. They say, wow, that's out of character for that individual. Let me get them on the call, understand what happened, and I will get back to you by 2:00 today. Two completely different ways of handling the same situation. And that's usually when you find out about the crazy thing the client did that led the engineer to do the crazy thing that they did, right? So there's always two sides of that story. Make sure you find them before you react. So, all right, this one. I love, and by the way, Jen, if there's questions in there, just jump on in and we'll address them. But I want to talk about your successor and this picture. Um, I love this picture with the dad with he's got his arms out, he's got his daughter on the bike. He's done the things to try to take precautions, right? He's put the helmet on, he's got the gloves, or the elbow pads, he's got the knee pads. He's done the things to try to protect her while she's learning how to ride the bike. I had this up one time and somebody pointed out that the helmet isn't on her head correctly. And at first I thought, oh, I got to find a better picture. But then I thought, no, that's perfect, right? Because as leaders and managers and dad, we don't always know how to do it correctly, right? So I'm like, that's perfect that's the way the helmet is on her head. But there's something really important happening here. Dad had the courage to let go of the seat, knowing full well that she's probably going to lean to the left, lean to the right, and crash and be on the ground, crying, blood, hopefully no blood. But what's he going to do, right? Is he going to say, oh, honey, you shouldn't ride a bike? Or is he going to say, okay, good job. Let's get you back up, wipe off the tears and the dirt and the blood and get her back on the seat. And this is what's most important, is have the courage to let go of that seat again and let her pedal off on her own, knowing she's probably going to crash again. And the reason I love this is it's so important that we always, all of us are training somebody to take over something we're doing. The person down the line is training somebody to take over something they're doing, right? The level 3 engineer is training a level 2. The level 2 is training a level 1. And everybody's training somebody. We just have to have the courage to let go of the seat, knowing that they're going to crash. So let's take a look at this thing that we call the quality curve, where we've got this minimum quality level. And up there in the top left, we got this green line where somebody is currently doing whatever the job is well above that minimum quality level. And then we start this transition to another person doing this work. And it's likely going to fall below the minimum quality level. And our instinct is to make that bad decision, right? To take it back and give it to the person that's already good at it, right? On the bicycle, it's going to sound like, oh, honey, you're terrible at riding a bike. You should never ride a bike again. And from now on, I'll do all the bike riding, right? Like that's what that decision really is. But the reality is that's not what we need to do. We need to take the longer, harder path, which is the good decision to get the other person involved and teach and coach and teach and coach until we now have two people able to do whatever the task is at well above that minimum quality level. Now, here's what I learned is when you're at that decision point at the bottom, you're going to get a call from your client. And it's going to sound a lot like, this isn't what I signed up for. This is terrible. Now, what do? You go with the truth. You say, you know what? We agree. We recognize that this isn't the quality that we expected to deliver. This person's first or second time doing it on their own. This circumstance we didn't foresee. We're getting the other person involved. We're going to get this back on track as quick as we can. Now, this is where the Pareto principle kicks in, the 80-20 rule. 20% of your clients, when they're faced with this decision point with you, they're going to say, I don't care, you're terrible, this isn't what I expected. And really, you just say, I get it. And you do the same thing. You get the other person involved, you get it back on track, and you go on with your day. Now, me personally, if that's the attitude of a client, I'm going to put him on my C client list and look for an opportunity to rotate him out eventually. But if you're a gambler, I'll take the 80% bet every time, because when you say we've got a person doing this that doesn't normally do it, but they're learning, they respond with, I don't like it, but I've got the same problem in my business trying to get more people to do the things we do. What can I do to be helpful to get this back on track, right? And once I learned that that's the reaction, when you go with the truth, I'm going to take that 80% bet every time. And it's just something we have to do to get more people doing the things that we do to reduce those bottlenecks. Now, it's important to reduce this, where I got the diagonal lines, the time below the minimum quality, right? We do our best to work through that by using these learning models and teaching people how to do things before we set them free on their own. And one of the things I found interesting is as I studied these 5 different learning models, uh, they all have the same 4 steps, right? I'm a scouter. Some of you know I'm a scoutmaster, and we use the EDGE method: explain, demonstrate, guide, enable, right? There's another model called the teaching model: tell them, show them, help them, watch them. Explicit teaching: I do it, you watch; I do it, you help. And then we hand the work over to the student, right? You do it, I help, and then you do it, I watch. Situational leadership, if you've come across that, right? Directing, coaching, supporting, delegating. And I remember being a manager in training and Oli literally drawing these 4 quadrants on the whiteboard and saying, you're in coaching, I'm moving you into supporting right now on this topic. And he just did a really good job of creating clarity on where he expected me to be as a leader on a certain topic. This hierarchy of competence, I love this one. I'll give a quick description of this one. Um, the analogy that was used is tying your shoes. And I learned this one from Brad Scow when he was with HTG, now the ConnectWise Evolve community. But you start off on any topic with an unconscious incompetence, right? So in the tying the shoe analogy, you're 1 or 2 years old, you don't even know that you've got shoes that need to be tied, right? But around 3 or 4, you get a conscious incompetence. You know you've got shoes that need to be tied. You have no idea how to do it, but you're just constantly shoving your shoe in somebody's face, asking them to tie your shoe for you. Around 4, maybe 5 years old, hopefully before you go to kindergarten, you get a conscious competence, meaning you know how to tie your shoe. You can do it, but it takes a lot of thought and concentration and effort. But you can do it. Quality may not be great. They come untied a lot, but that's okay. And ultimately, hopefully, we've all achieved an unconscious competence where if somebody said, hey, did you tie your shoe? You'd literally be like, I don't know. You'd have to look down to see if your shoe is tied, right? So, but again, the key takeaway on this slide is there's these 5 different teaching models. And I find it interesting. They all have all 4 steps. The first 2 steps where the teacher is doing the work, and the second 2 steps where the student is doing the work. So make sure that you stay committed because you have to do all 4 steps for somebody to really learn. One hand up and one hand down. So this is something I like to call the vacuum culture. And I learned about it in Oli did a really good thing when I was, I was probably in my middle to late 20s. I was in a Mustang car club. And I mentioned to him I was thinking about running for club president. And he thought that would be a good idea. It would help me with my leadership skills. And I noticed something that the club had stayed the same size for years. And every year we would elect a new president. And at the end of the year, the president would kind of hand over the gavel and we'd never see them again, hand it over to the next the next president. And one year somebody suggested that I should run for president. And of course, my first thought was, you know what, you guys don't like me? But then I was like, okay, here's the deal. I will do this, but I'm not going to fall into the same trap where that person ended up doing all the work. Nobody would help them. And at the end of the year, they literally develop a disdain for all the other club members because nobody would help them and they had to do all the work. And there's some real work to do in a car club, especially around running a car show. And I said, look, I'll run for president, but you're all going to help me. And everybody's like, oh yeah, we'll help. And then, I ran unopposed and got elected. So I got tested in my first month in office. The person that was doing the newsletter took a job in another state and they were leaving the club. And I remember asking, who wants to do the newsletter? And, yeah, you're right. It sounded just like that. Total crickets. So I was faced with a choice. Am I going to do the newsletter as the leader or not? And I chose to let the quality curve play out, and I didn't do it. And that next turnout that we normally had 15 or 20 cars at, very terrible turnout. I think we only had 2 or 3 cars show up. And at the next meeting, there was a lot of excuses. Well, I couldn't remember if it was Saturday or Sunday. I didn't know where we were supposed to meet. And I remember somebody in the crowd saying, I didn't get a newsletter. And that's when I was like, you're right, you didn't. We need somebody to do the newsletter. Who's going to do it? And finally, somebody said, I guess I can do it, right? And what I'm trying to say here is I had to let the quality level fall. I had to create a vacuum before somebody would step up and say, I guess I can do it. Now, remember, this is an organization of volunteers. When I come into the office, what I learned to do is run my organization just like they were all volunteers. Even though I gave them a paycheck, I treated everybody like a volunteer. Guess what? The club grew. The club grew because we spread the work out. I needed a car show chairman. And car show is a lot of work to run a car show that a couple hundred, cars are going to come to. And it was like, hey, who wants to be the car show chairman? Because I don't feel I can do it. And it was crickets again. And finally, somebody raised their hand, said, I guess I can do it. Guess who it was? The same person that said they would do the newsletter. And it would have been so easy as a leader to say, thank you. But my job was to say, no, you're already doing the newsletter. I need somebody else to volunteer to be the car show chairman. And somebody else said, I guess I can do it. And then we spent time teaching them how to do it. And that club grew and grew and grew. And it's kind of the same thing inside of your organizations. And like we had to go for the gold. We had to pass a whole bunch of Microsoft tests. And I use that exact same methodology to spread the load around. Who's going to pass what test? We spread the load around. We created accountability. Everybody knew who needed to pass what test by when so that we could get our Microsoft Gold authorization. It's the exact same thing. It translates straight across. The one hand up, one hand down, this is largely about walking around and saying, who did you teach something to today? Or who did you learn something from today? And you just want to create that culture that everybody is helping everybody take that next step up in their career. So love that picture. So I'm going to dive in a little bit more to the operational journey. So as I founded C-Level, we really divided all these operational aspects up into these 10, we called them pillars back then, but it's, get your PSA configured correctly, get your policy and procedure documented, right? This is really the life of the ticket around triage, dispatch, time entry. Establish your measurable KPIs. What is it that you're going to measure? Get your service team HR figured out. We need org charts, job descriptions. We need comp plans, that kind of stuff. Section 5 was leverage your tools, right? We got all PSA, RMM, documentation systems, just all these different tools that we use. And now we got the whole security suite of tools and we're barely using them. So let's put a focus on working on our tools. Section 6 was get your accounting systems in order. That's around chart of accounts, getting your P&L, that kind of stuff, working on procurement. Section 7, I call it the client-facing systems. This is where we work on, you change kind of the focus. In 1 through 6, where our focus is us looking at our own business. But in Section 7, you stand in the client's perspective and look at your business. And this is where we do, quarterly business reviews, the VCIO processes, but this is also where project management lives, that kind of stuff. Section 8 is get ready to grow, right? If we're really building this machine that runs with consistent quality of service, another EMyth term, then we're going to grow and we're going to need to hire people. So we need employee hiring processes, onboarding processes, team, continuing education programs. That's the kind of stuff we work on in Section 8. Section 9 is marketing. We got to get the word out that we got the best machine around to deliver IT services. And then Section 10 is selling. So I'm just going to go through a couple of these. I'm going to go through each of these. I'm not going to go extreme detail because it would take me another 2 hours to do it. But of how we do it differently in each of those four maturity levels, right? So establishment was like everybody reports to the owner. Enablement, there's typically an owner and a service manager running the company, and we're working hard on KPIs and standardization. Expansion is that leadership team running the company, still typically one geography at that point. And then enhancement is really that sort of hyperscaler, multi-geography, rapid expansion, a lot of mergers and acquisitions activity going on. So, oh, do we have a chat bubble? All right, let's take a look. How does the advent of remote work impact leadership and culture of the journey? So, I got to tell you, my first experience with the remote work was right before I started Sea Level. We had a young man, his family lived on the East Coast. He was working for us in the Seattle area, and his dad got sick. And it was kind of interesting. This individual, I couldn't get him to show up on time to save his life. And it was frustrating, but clients loved him. He did everything right once he made it to work, and he'd stay late and do projects, whatever. But I just couldn't get him to show up on time. And this is probably 2009 timeframe, but his dad got sick, and he's like, I got to go back to the East Coast. And we're like, I didn't want to lose him. But he moved back, and it was kind of funny because we needed to open the office a little earlier at 7 a.m. And the individual that would never show up on time became the one that opened the office because it was 10 o'clock his time. And it ended up working out awesome. It was my first experience with a full remote employee. And keep in mind, we were firmly at the far end of that second stage, that enablement stage, maybe entering that expansion stage. So KPIs were very much in place. The incentives were there, which I'll talk about in a minute when we get the bonus plan, to drive the fact that they're at work, they're focusing on the right stuff. And it wasn't an issue for me. And then when I founded Sea Level, we never actually had an office. We had coaches all over North America, Canada and the US. And we never had an office. We were 100% remote work. So I think if you are running the business in a mature way with the expectations of their work deliverable, being remote doesn't really impact things. I do think we need to get people together in a face-to-face environment to create and maintain that interpersonal bond. But hopefully I answered that question. So anyway, let's talk about kind of section 1, that PSA configuration. Business unit mapping, right? This is what are our profit centers. Like, what am I going to track my revenue against and my costs against so I can understand my margins in each of these profit centers? In those beginning stages, I'm happy if I can coach somebody into separating their labor margins from their product margins, right? Product resale margins at this stage are probably in that 10 to 15% range. As we get over into the expansion, product margins are starting to go into the mid 20% range. But labor margins over here are probably coming in around 40%. But as we move across, we'll find that contract labor has different margins than break fix, time and materials labor. And as we continue to grow and mature the way we track and sell our services, we'll find that break fix, projects, and managed services have a different margin expectation. Right? The further we move down that list, the better we expect the margins to be, because we're leveraging tools and technology and standardization and lowest cost resources to deliver the services. And again, the more the company grows, the more expansion we have, the more we need that granularity in our income statement. So this is how we're going to map out our business units between break fix, professional services, managed services. And you can see even the product resale starts to get more granularity in it. One of the mistakes I made, being kind of a company in that third column, was when I started doing this coaching thing is I was working with some smaller companies, under 7 or 8 employees, but I was trying to apply the standards up from that third stage. And I realized I was actually doing some damage to the company because they didn't have the staffing or the maturity to understand why things were set up that way. And I learned when I'm working with a stage one company, I need to configure the systems to run as a stage one company. And when they approach that plateau, we start reconfiguring the systems to run as if they're a stage two company. I think about it as kind of like the bricks in the wall. And, as we look at all these individual processes, I look at it as we're taking bricks out of the wall and kind of building stairs to get to that next plateau as we redefine each of these roughly 100 processes to be different to match the maturity level that we want to be in. Tickets or the workflow rules. And most of the PSAs out there, ConnectWise, Autotask, Halo, Synchro, they all have some sort of automation built into them. But I noticed that our stage one companies were really just automating ticket workflow. And then as we progress, we add projects, and then we add the invoicing, and then we add more of the selling motion around opportunities. Kind of same thing with the agreement types, right? Like the kinds of agreements that we sell or contracts that we sell are not standardized at all in that establishment level. And as we move into that second stage, we start seeing, right, the precious metals program, the platinum, gold, silver, bronze, tin, dirt, like however you want to name your agreements there. And we start to see some block time agreements come in. But if you notice, as we get into those third tiers and we increase the maturity, we get more and more clients on our all-you-can-eat plans, our tolerance for the clients that are on our entry-level plans, the silver plans, the bronze plans, our tolerance for working with them kind of goes away because you got all the arguing over whether that's covered under the agreement or not. And over time, they drop off. And you can see the most mature companies really only have their platinum all-in, all-you-can-eat plan. Kind of same thing. The way we put the data into our PSA systems, it progresses. And then in Autotask, this is categories, subcategories. In ConnectWise, we break things up on service boards, and Autotask, it could be queues. But somehow we need to break things up. And when you're in those early stages, we really just need a support board and a project board. But as you move into the next maturity level, we really need to understand our break fix versus our managed services, which is going to be triage, help desk, our alerts, that kind of stuff, sales. But you can see the way that we have to categorize our tickets increases as we want to get the more and more and more granularity out of the data. And as our maturity level increases, we are beginning to put more things in the system. Like you can see, there's some accounts receivable or accounts payable boards where we're kind of leveraging our ticketing systems to keep track of the work that needs to be done there. There's even careers boards, that kind of stuff. But one of the points I want to make is don't over design it for the stage you're in now. So let's move through a couple more, like ticket triage, right? And I'm not going to read all of these as we go through this. I just kind of want to point out that, like, when we're dispatching tickets, when we're in that 0 to 5 engineer stage, self-dispatch is the best way to manage the tickets, because you can do like broadcast messaging, like send an email to everybody that there's a new ticket. But that just becomes way too much noise when you go past about 4 or 5 engineers. And we really have to start doing directed messaging and have a centralized person understanding the entirety of the workload and understanding the skill sets and divvying out the work and keeping the schedules full so that the engineers have the ability to enter their time and have the next thing already determined that they need to work on. And again, I'm going to kind of page through these so you guys can pause the video, but you'll see that we do everything very differently depending on which company size and maturity level that you're in. um, service team, HR. You can kind of see on the engineer comp in those entry level stages, nobody knows how to bonus. It's pretty much there's a base pay, and at the whim of the owner, they feel like they got a little bit of money, they might write a bonus check. That's literally how I normally see it work. But then as we move into that second stage, what's our goal? Process compliance. So we have their base pay and we pay them a bonus for complying with our new processes that we're putting in place. That's not the way I want to continue to bonus them in the long run, but that's what we're trying to achieve right now. For example, if time entry is what I'm bonusing around, getting an accurate time entry, I'll pay a bonus for, even if it shows that we have terrible utilization. Maybe we have 58% utilization. I'll still pay a bonus for accuracy because now I know that number is accurate. But as we move into that third stage, I'm paying a bonus because they're converting their time into revenue at a rate of 3 times their pay. If I have a $60,000 a year engineer, divided by 12 is $5,000 a month, they need to be producing revenue of $15,000 a month. If they're doing that, then I want to pay them a bonus. So depending on the maturity stage, we want to change the way we do things. As I move into leverage your tools, you can see that there's sort of a path for adding more and more into what we do with our tools. Same thing with getting our accounting systems in order. I've got proposal integration there at the top, right? Like the owner's typically doing all these things in Word and Excel. They're not using any tools, but the more people need to interact with those proposals while they're in progress. And then once we do the procurement, right, the more we interact in that, the more we need to leverage our systems because people can't keep things in their head anymore. I like to use, we closed a deal. So we got a proposal. We need to procure it, and then we need to dispatch it. And when you have multiple people, well, initially we have one person, the same person doing the proposal, the procurement, and the dispatch, right? So they can keep it all in their head. We don't need to use a system. But as you grow a little bit, you'll end up with a different person doing proposals, a different person doing procurement, and a different person doing dispatching. Now we need to use the system more because we can't keep it in our heads. Then as we get into that third stage or fourth stage, you probably have multiple people doing proposals, multiple people doing procurement, and multiple people doing dispatching. Now we have to put even more details into the systems. And that's why we need to re-engineer the processes in order to move from one of these plateaus into the next. And until you re-engineer those processes, you won't move to the next plateau. So, yep, I'm ready. How can someone without direct reports still show leadership and exert authority? Any tips? I'm asking, I think what you're asking is you have, like maybe the dispatcher, right? They don't have direct reports. The engineers report to the service manager, but the dispatcher has to be an influencer and carry some authority without them being direct reports. I think that's what you're asking. It's really important that the service manager set the tone that the dispatcher is helping you organize, and you need to work in concert with that dispatcher. And if you're not, then we have a core value misalignment, and we need to have a discussion about not lining up with the core values. That's the way I would probably handle that. So I'm going to kind of just continue to go through some of these slides quickly. I'm leaving here long enough you could pause on them. But hiring processes, we've got, you can see kind of how it progresses. We go from, we do a job posting, we get a bunch of resumes, we talk to some candidates, and we make an offer. But as we progress, now we start to add skill testing, right? We interview them on how well they're going to follow our processes, right? It's a different set of questions. As we get into that expansion stage, a lot of our interview questions are more closely aligned with our core values. What's happening with our core values? Do they line up with that? We start using personality tests to help understand, not to qualify or disqualify, but more to understand how we would manage this individual. You're always recruiting, right? And check out enhancement. When we've got the systems in place where we're running predictable, repeatable systems, when you come to work and it's less fire drills because we're more committed to the proactive work, the best candidates will be seeking you out. It's a whole different paradigm. Um, Number 9, marketing. You can kind of see on marketing plan, that second row there. You just start off with, you work your friend network, right? That's where you get your leads. And then, but you have to do a great job, because then you'll start getting referrals. And I'll tell you what, even with the biggest companies, no matter how much money they spend on marketing programs, their number one source of new clients is always referrals. So that means you have to take it serious, that really you're not looking for a happy face from your client when you're doing work for them. You're looking for the ultimate compliment, which is a referral. And everything you do for a client, measure it against, is what I'm doing, what I'm saying, how I'm helping them going to earn us a referral? And that's a completely different way of thinking about how you work with your clients, because that's really where the growth comes from. And then obviously you have to build your marketing flywheel, newsletters, webinars, speaking at events. This all contributes to this flywheel that once you get it spinning, people will attach themselves to it, and on a regular basis they'll fly off right into your sales funnel. So same thing, developing your sales strategy. Initially the owner's doing all the sales. Comp plans progress, but check out that bottom line, the sales process for engineers participating in scoping. We see owners doing all the scoping, and we got to go through that quality curve to start getting engineers involved in scoping. Because if you get a salesperson and the engineering team doesn't know how to do the scoping accurately, they're going to go to the owner and say, hey, I just used my Rolodex, I got a lead. They go to the owner looks at it and says, oh, here, let me show you what I do. They bring 15 years of experience to the table and they whip out a scope. The salesperson's kind of sitting there with their mouth on the table, like, I don't even know what you just did. And then now the owner is kind of like over invested in this particular lead. So they micromanage the salesperson all the way through the process. They get the close. And then the salesperson sticks out their hand for a commission, and the owner's like, why do I have to pay you a commission? I just did all the work, right? I see that over and over and over. The key is we got to teach the owner to teach somebody in the service organization how to do those scope of work developments. And it's going to be the quality curve. You're not going to like the results the first 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. But over time, with the teaching and the coaching, now you'll get somebody on the sales or in the service organization able to do the scope of works the way the owner likes it. Now you bring on that salesperson, they go to the service department provides a scope, they get the deal closed, and now there's true revenue growth without the owner's involvement. And I see that over and over and over, that we need to work on that. Now, we've got these operational best practices, right? We're working on, I just showed you about 100 different things in your business that need to be worked on so that you can remove those bricks in the wall so you can move through into the next plateau level. But here's the thing, change hurts the organization. Nobody likes change. When you change a process, you're going to lower employee satisfaction. Can't get around that. But what I found is if we use these 5 phases, you're not going to lower satisfaction as much, right? So number 1, understand the best practice. Reach out. Pax8 Academy has a ton of best practices that's posted out there at academy.pax8.com. There's a lot of free stuff out there. Use it. The coaching has some more detailed documents. If you go the peer group, if you're in a peer group, ask your peers, talk to your vendors, go to ConnectWise or Autotask, ask them for best practice. That's phase 1. Take it all in. Phase 2 is to take all of that and decide how you're going to do business and get it documented. The outcome is the document. This is how we do business. in phase 3, you use those documents to train your team, and it's future tense. This is how we're going to do business starting next Monday, and get on board and answer the questions before you make any changes. Now it's time for phase 4, implement that best practice. That's when you start making the changes to the system, and you're going to feel employee satisfaction go down, right? Because we're asking them to do things differently. And that's why it's so important to commit to phase 5. That's the inspect what you expect. We're measuring, are people starting to follow the new process? And when they're not, we teach and coach, right? And I would consider throwing a bonus in there to incent, right? Use the carrot, not the stick, to incent people to follow the new processes. And I'm going to wrap up with one of my favorite quotes by Thomas Edison: vision without execution is hallucination. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and send me an email if I can answer any questions for you, right? Working on the business with your managers, and let your staff work in the business, straight out of the EMyth. So again, thank you very, very, very much for sitting through that. Hopefully you picked up something good. I'm going to toss this now right over to Keith Marciano with the sales pitch.
Play ball. I'm really excited that Rex is talking about the operational journey today. I've heard him speak on this topic numerous times when I was in the MSP world, and it's even more insightful today. Part of the operational journey for any entrepreneur is the journey to grow your business. This is where the sales journey begins for a lot of technical owners who have never really been responsible for sales or bringing in new business. So the thought of selling new business can be nerve-wracking for some, for sure. It's like being a little kid and stepping to the plate for the first time. And if you're facing that pitcher for the first time and here comes the ball, the fear of getting hit, the fear of striking out, right? Those things are real for a little kid trying to hit a baseball. Eventually, the kids overcome some of that fear. And once they kind of get a feel for it, relax a little bit, and then they taste the success of actually hitting the ball, well, that's where the magic happens. It's a great feeling. The sales journey is similar to that feeling that kid had. Fear of actually attempting to go find new business because you haven't done it before. The thought of striking out, letting down your family, letting down your employees, not getting enough at-bats so that way you can go win more business, and many more. It's a real fear. So let's touch all the bases on the sales journey and how to bring you more success. 1, change your sales mindset. You're not selling, you're solving problems. You're an entrepreneur and you're talking to other entrepreneurs. If you struggle with this, a good tip is to journal daily. Be like Bart Simpson on the chalkboard. Keep writing down, you're not selling, you're solving problems. 2, you have to get in the batter's box. Doing nothing is not an option. You have to get out of your office, get out from behind your desk, and get into the business community. Go to groups where other entrepreneurs go. Meet people, talk to them, have coffee meetings. Spread the word about how good you are and how great your company is. 3, define a narrow target market. A target client profile. This includes a narrow size as well as maybe 1 to 3 industries that you want to target. If you don't know them, who are your best clients? What industries do your engineers know and excel at? Go talk to those clients. Go chat with them and find out 1 to 3 business problems you solve for them. 4, go practice. Get sales training and create a sales process. Don't practice in front of your prospects, right? Practice on your own with others you know. You wouldn't wait until the big game to practice your swing. So don't practice in front of valuable prospects. Practice makes perfect. Read books, listen to podcasts. Pax8 has a lot of practice opportunities for you. Free on-demand courses, free sales podcasts, affordable instructor-led courses, and even one-to-one personal sales coaches like me. So the sales journey is long, but it all starts with taking those first steps into the batter's box.
Keith, you are really hitting home runs with these sales pitches. I love that. Be like Bart Simpson on the chalkboard. I am not selling, I am solving problems. Write that one down. That's really the basis for this entire results selling framework that we've created. It's free, academy.pax8.com. Go to the RSF hub. You'll find some great stuff in there. That's where all this content's coming from. So I'm going to move on over to final thoughts. So today really is about recognizing that there's this collection of all these operational processes we need to work on, and it's tearing ourselves away from the tyranny of the urgent. Stop being the technician, start being the manager and working on the business. And there's a roadmap. Just pick whatever is most important and start working on it. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching. Be sure to check us out next week. Britton Tembley Benton will be our guest, and we're going to be talking about Copilot. We know that's everybody's favorite topic these days. And remember, we are live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Mountain and on demand always. Please take a minute, like and subscribe, and ask yourself, after all that we just went through, what are you going to do differently when you come into the business tomorrow? Thanks, everyone. Bye.